Story 1. He wouldn't deal with his mental illness. He refused to seek treatment after his diagnosis, and we fell into a cycle of him being on medication and then not being on medication. The episodes he experienced were devastating for both of us, putting a strain on our relationship. I believe we both truly loved each other and still do, but there was nothing I could do. I offered him support as best as I could, but ultimately it was up to him to put in the effort. Now, we love each other, have a child together, and will never be together. I try not to dwell on it too much because it's sad, and I feel it's better not to linger on it. I still have to live my life. Story 2. He moved to the other side of the world for work. Years later, I am still sad about it. He was the love of my life, but his job took priority. Story 3. She was mentally unstable, controlling, and had trust issues. She wanted to spend every moment together and expected me to give up my social life, which I did to avoid conflict. Even when she had work and I was off, she wanted me to stay home and do nothing. I couldn't even stop by my parents' house on my way home because she would continuously call, demanding immediate responses, or else she would become very upset. I should have ended it much sooner. Story 4. He was becoming increasingly miserable and unkind over time. He seemed to dislike the fact that he was aging. I had to leave in search of peace and happiness. Story 5. She became manic, refused treatment, and declined a diagnosis. It ruined our marriage, my career, and all my finances. Story 6. He received an incredible opportunity in another country, something he had always wanted. If I had asked, he would have given it up. He told me that later on, but I already knew he would have. I didn't want him to stay when he disliked what he was doing, especially since that was his dream job. He moved and I stayed. Story 7. She kept coming home extremely intoxicated and attacking me. I don't avoid drugs, but she was unbearable after drinking too much whiskey and using cocaine. Have you ever been hit in the face with keys while fully asleep? It was the worst wake-up call I ever experienced. Story 8. I had a tendency to overthink situations and make them seem worse than they were. As a result, I broke up with her, convinced by my flawed logic that she was a much worse person than she truly was. Ultimately, it was all in my head. Story 9. We met in college and graduated 6 months apart. I graduated in June and she graduated in December. I had a full-time job and was renting a house with 3 roommates, while she was living in a rented room with friends. After her graduation, she struggled to find full-time work in our area and had only 3 months left on her lease. I could not accommodate her and her cat in my place, nor could I afford to break my lease and pay the down payment plus another month's rent. When her parents came to help her move out, she promised to continue looking for work in our area and to return as soon as possible. At that moment, I realized we were unlikely to make it work. I disliked my job, and most of my college friends had already moved away for their new careers. I didn't want her to return to the college town just to be with me when she had so many opportunities in her city. We tried to make it work for a few more months, but the distance proved too difficult and eventually we fell apart. That was 13 years ago. Story 10. I kept thinking the hardships we faced were just growing pains, and that because we loved each other, we were struggling toward the same destination. I believed happiness was just around the corner. It turns out we were incompatible and not even aiming at the same goal. Story 11. After many years together, he continued to end our relationship every time we fought, saying it was over but never followed through. Finally, I decided to leave, and then he had the audacity to say he wished I would have fought for him. Story 12. We stopped having difficult conversations. I tried for a long time, but he would just agree and nothing would change. Never fighting sounds fantastic until you realize how many issues and resentments build up. I ran out of energy and walked away. He is an amazing person, and I will love him for the rest of my life, but I became so tired. I wish he had worked through some of his issues when we were still together, and I wish I had done the same. Story 13. Oh, it was beautiful. We had the same birthday a year apart. We were both nerdy and loved trying new foods. We drank Japanese wine and watched television shows. We had similar childhood experiences, large and mostly caring families, and strange habits. She used to wash her socks in the sink, while I liked to put everything on a to-do list. Everything was beautiful. But then she ended the relationship, and I'm still a bit sad about it. Story 14. So many reasons turned the road to becoming a couple into a long and difficult journey. That should have been my cue to give up, but I was a decade younger than I am now and very much in love. In the beginning, I tried to end contact when he made it clear that a relationship was not going to happen. However, he wanted to stay friends, which in reality meant living together most days of the week and being intimate. By the time we were officially a couple, I had, in my heart of hearts, given up. However, the sunk cost fallacy and my codependency, something I finally overcame, made me give it another chance. He became increasingly cruel, subjecting me to psychological torture and some sexual coercion, which ultimately killed the love that remained. I used to love this man with all my being. I pined for him for years, but during the final months of our relationship, I felt nothing at all. No hate, disappointment, or sadness. I simply wanted it to be over and for him to be out of my life. He asked for a final kiss, and after our lips parted, he had the insight to say, "Oh, are things really that bad?" A kiss can communicate a lot, and he absolutely got the message. I have not had any communication with him for 5 years now. I miss him sometimes, but I quickly remind myself that what I miss is not real. The person I miss is the facade he presented to the world and the version he showed me in the early years. Story 15. I was young and had a long way to go in terms of development. Perhaps in another lifetime, I hope. Story 16. She had no intention of progressing in the relationship. She got a job in a different city 8 months into the relationship while telling me she wanted to move to my city. I realized she had planned this before we got together. I was furious. There were several other issues, but that was the final straw. Story 17. When I communicated my problems in the relationship, I was outright dismissed. I was either told I was making myself feel that way, which I never understood, or that I was simply wrong. Additionally, she yelled at me like I was a child if I made the slightest mistake. It wasn't always that way, but she revealed her true self after we got married. Story 18. He was unfaithful to me, and I was putting in too much effort to make the relationship work. I was young and naive, not realizing I was the only one invested in the relationship at that point. Story 19. After 24 years and moving countries to Arkansas, she cheated on me for the last 2 years. I never knew until she walked out. That was 2 very tough years ago, but I met a wonderful woman, and life is sweet again. I've never been happier. Story 20. There was no way for us to finish our studies at the same university. Both of us were offered our dream programs, but not at the same university or even in the same country. We were mature enough to realize we didn't want a long-distance relationship, so we mutually agreed to break up. Story 21. He is married to his mother. I am still being treated like an outsider despite being together for 10 years. Story 22. I realized I prefer men over women. I also grew tired of feeling like a babysitter and sensed that she was only doing enough to keep me around. There were many chaotic moments, but we used to live at her mother's house. Every time we planned to move or actually moved, she found a way to get us back into her mother's house. One instance was getting a pit bull just before we were set to move into a trailer, which prevented us from moving in. Story 23. We were in different places and I realized it. I went into a dark spiral after I broke up with her and did things I still feel bad about. I moved across the country to figure things out. I hope she is as happy as I am. Story 24. Dear 20-somethings, falling in love, hard and fast, will be a significant part of your life. If you're lucky, though many people don't reach that level, you will hear stories about it. All I can say is please move forward with caution. It seems that being friends with exes isn't as easy nowadays. Story 25. I miss him very much, just as a human. We decided to have no contact to make it easier for both of us. I hope he is out there happily living his best life. Story 26. She had a boyfriend the first time we connected, and I could never get that out of my mind. Story 27. I didn't realize she went from an average-looking girl to a real beauty in 8 years. Of course, she enjoyed the extra attention, and that was it. I let her go because I thought she would love me eternally and would come back. I should have proposed. Story 28. Before she cheated on me, I was already on the brink of breaking up with her. I realized I couldn't handle her passive-aggressive attitude towards me or others, and we wanted different things in life. Story 29. We had been together for 9 years. 2 years prior, we had discussed getting married, but we weren't planning to have children, so it wasn't a big deal or a priority. However, he was informed that the company he worked for was being sold and that he would be losing his job in about 4 months. He had some chronic medical conditions, so I was concerned about him losing his medical coverage. I approached him and said, if we get married, I can put you on my medical coverage, and it will only cost me an extra $150 a month. Without taking a breath, he replied, "Oh, that's okay. I'm sure I'll find another job by the time I'm laid off." Okay, I thought. For months later, with his termination approaching, I suggested we get married again. Once more, without pausing, he said, "Oh, that's okay. I'll just get Cobra." It was frustrating that he believed it would be better to pay for insurance through Cobra while searching for another job instead of getting married and paying a modest $150 a month. What really bothered me was the quickness of his response, as if he didn't even want to consider the idea of marriage. That's when I realized that his feelings for me had changed, and I didn't want to deal with it anymore. Story 30. My perspective is that she was drug-dependent on opioids at the time and very impulsive, never taking emotional responsibility. She wore her heart on her sleeve and was always involved in too many things that mentally drained her. However, her empathy forced her into these situations, adding unnecessary stress. From her perspective of me, I was emotionally closed and had not learned to be vulnerable on an intimate level. I always withheld my emotions from her and hid my anxiety attacks by taking alone time. I was emotionally immature and highly dependent on alcohol due to suicidal tendencies caused by a lack of treatment for anxiety and depression. I was not considerate of her feelings while dealing with my issues. Overall, we both cared for and loved each other deeply, but the lack of communication and failure to address small issues derailed the relationship. It was fun but highly dysfunctional. Story 31. I was certain she was unfaithful with a coworker. She denied it completely, insisting it was not true. Guess who she married a year later and had a baby with? Story 32. I realized that I was kidding myself. We had nothing in common, and she did not love me at all, not even a little. She was using me, and I was being manipulated by someone who didn't care about me in the least. I felt like a complete fool. Story 33. My first girlfriend and I dated for 2 years. Then she broke up with me and said she didn't really like me. She was just going along with it. My second girlfriend turned out to have serious mental health issues. I hope she is doing all right. With the next girlfriend, we just couldn't resolve our conflicts. Although fights ended, we never truly fixed things. That relationship lasted only 4 months. My last girlfriend broke up with me after 3 years. She said she couldn't keep getting hurt, but couldn't explain what I was doing to hurt her. I believe she is still dealing with childhood pain. I hope she finds healing. Each of these relationships taught me things about myself that I could improve upon, and I hope I also helped them in some way. Story 34. My neighbor became pregnant while I worked overtime to afford the cost of starting a family. I should have just been financially irresponsible and expected society to cover the expenses like others. Story 35. We were young, needed to live our lives, and find ourselves separately. 15 years later, we reconnected. We have been married for several years and have a family together. Story 36. He was essentially my first love, but after 4 years, I realized I didn't really like how he was treating me and his disregard for my life choices, constantly making fun of what I majored in. I was immature and ready to settle. And now, many years later, I'm glad I took that painful step toward new people and new adventures. Call me what you will, but I've come to understand that there is a world to discover out there. Story 37. She started developing feelings for someone else and didn't have the courage to end the relationship, so I took it upon myself to do so. Story 38. Dead bedroom with no prospect of improvement. We tried for 5 years, but in the end, it just didn't work. Story 39. I was graduating while she was still a sophomore. It had to end. I think about her every day. I don't know if she even remembers me. Story 40. After doing something that risked my mental and physical safety, I asked him directly a few days later, after sleeping at my parents' for some space to reflect. I simply asked if he would ever actually want to love and protect me, or at least agree to talk to me directly when he had an issue instead of doing mean or hurtful things to me. He replied, "I'm not where you're at," and then told all our mutual friends that I was trying to force commitment and marriage. I never mentioned those things, but we did live together at the time. After leaving, I remembered that what he did to me to cause the conversation in the first place, he had done to his only other girlfriend before me. I realized it was not a mistake. He had set me up to possibly hurt me because he wanted to tell people the story of how it was my fault we broke up for some reason, just like he told people, including me, about her. I remember when he told me she left him. We were just co-workers at the time, and I felt badly for him. What absolute nonsense it all was. The reason I left was that he ditched me in the woods in the middle of the night after putting a hallucinogenic substance in my drink. He knew I didn't use that drug as my mother suffers from schizophrenia, and it was not worth the risks to me. He told me I was living in a fear state reality. Looking back, it still makes my blood boil. Story 41. Alcoholism affected my relationship with the woman I will always love. She wasn't perfect and definitely contributed to our split, but ultimately, if I hadn't struggled with alcoholism, I could have been a better man. Story 42. Not break up so much as couldn't convince her to go out with me in the first place. Story. I was working in Atlanta around 1989, and it was a coworker's first day on the job. She walked into a meeting I was in, and the very first thought across my mind was, this is the woman I am going to marry. Not in a creepy way, just, wow. Instant attraction for me, and when we got to know each other, it only deepened for me. She only ever saw me as a friend. Back then, I had some really bad tendencies, and when I look back almost 40 years ago, I cringe when I remember some of the things I did and said to get her to fall in love with me. Now, with way more yesterdays than tomorrows in my life, my view has obviously changed. We're still friends. We are both married to other people. I for 25 years and she for about 16 years. I realize now if we had gotten together, we would have made each other miserable. And it turns out she wasn't the love of my life after all. I married the love of my life. Story 43. She had a serious drug addiction and refused to seek help. Over time, she became increasingly abusive toward me. It took me a long time to find my way out of that situation, but I did it for my own mental and physical health. Story 44. I woke up one day and didn't feel in love anymore. I love him and I will forever, but I felt like unless I catered to everything he wanted when he wanted it, I was being selfish. The casual ease with which he called me selfish and was purposely hurtful was exhausting. We had fantastic times, and I miss him so much. However, 6 years took a serious toll on my mental health. I'm still recovering from it. I am deeply depressed and my self-esteem is low. I'm 40 years old and I feel like an emotional teenager. Story 45. She was intentionally mean too many times, and her insecurity became overwhelming. I was able to work through all the other issues. I loved her deeply and genuinely saw a future with her, but she refused to believe me. No matter how many times I expressed my actual feelings for her in writing or spoken word, she focused on anything that sounded negative and used that as my true feelings. She is convinced I didn't like her as a person, but she was one of my favorite people I've ever had in my life. I couldn't do it anymore, but I miss her every single day. Story 46. She left me, and now my life feels meaningless. I wanted to experience true love, but now I wish I never did. Story 47. Last year, they left me to die by not calling an ambulance because they were afraid of doctors and hospitals after a massive seizure caused by meningitis that left me bedbound and unable to care for myself. My parents returned from their holiday, discovered what happened, and called for help. I am lucky to be here today. I loved her, and it was truly a painful experience. To this day, I sometimes wish we were still together and miss her, but it hurts so much to try to understand how someone can leave a person they adore and cherish suffering in bed while their brain is shutting down. Story 48. I fell in love with someone else who showed me I was settling, thinking she was the one in the first place. Story 49. We were young and grew apart. I was about 3 years older, so I felt like I knew who I was when we met, while she was still finding herself. I loved who I fell in love with, and she changed. There are no hard feelings at all. We are still friends and keep in touch. However, I have found it difficult to fall in love again. It is truly challenging. Story 50. I knew I wanted to start my life over in another country on the other side of the world. Had I stayed home, I would have probably married him, but I knew deep down he wasn't the right person for me, even if we were happy in the moment. He wanted to move with me, but it wouldn't work logistically, and since I already had my doubts, I insisted on ending it when I moved. I still think back on the time we spent fondly, but in the end, it was definitely the best decision. I hope he found his happiness too. Story 51. He was a physically abusive alcoholic who was starting to show signs that he might hit the child in addition to me. Story 52. His overly traditional Catholic parents are trying to interfere with my choice of studies and lifestyle. Story 53. I realized that this person didn't truly love me. She was using me as a way to express her frustrations. By choosing to stay in a relationship with her, I would only be harming my mental health. Story 54. She was a few years older, and I realized she couldn't wait for me to become successful. She ended up marrying her boss a few years after our breakup. Story 55. We were together for almost 9 years. He cheated on me with our friend and had the nerve to break up with me while hiding the fact that he was cheating, but I caught him. Story 56. We weren't together long, but she was exploring religion and figuring out who she was spiritually. I still am, and I was a couple of years older. I didn't want to stop her and wanted her to be happy and free during that process. I experienced pain before from losing someone for not sharing fundamental values. I knew we would have argued over things like whom our children would follow and believe, if anything at all. There were beliefs about what happens to us when we are no longer here and how we were supposed to live life. Stuff like that pulled us apart. I think of her every day. It's been years, and I'm certain she's forgotten me. Regardless, I hope she knew how much she meant, and still means to me, and that she is happy and loved. There isn't a part of me that believes she is alone in this world, surrounded by people who are lucky to know her. Her contagious smile, with her scrunched nose, her genuine thoughts on everything, and her ability to make you feel wanted on this earth were among her many delightful qualities. She was one of a kind, and I still don't know if what I did was for the best. I just wanted her to be happy. Story 57. A couple of times I think it was for the better, but it's lonely now. I'm not sure I'm capable of finding that emotion again. Story 58. The first person wanted to move back to her hometown while I was attending graduate school. The second person was a mean drunk and wouldn't stop drinking. Story 59. Never in an official relationship with this person. My friend recently informed me that I was in a 4-year on and off situationship. I eventually ended it because, even though he liked me and I liked him, he didn't make an effort to be with me and had various excuses for why the timing wasn't right. 2 weeks before my now husband and I started dating, I asked him outright if he wanted to be in a relationship. He wanted to wait another 4 years to date until we were out of college and had at least 1 year of work experience. I asked because my now husband and I had started talking, and I developed feelings for him, but I wanted to see if I even had a chance with my situationship. I regret nothing. Story 60. He refused to seek the help he needed, always claiming he didn't have the time or resources, yet he always found them for other things. He prioritized his emotional self-protection over attending therapy so we could build a future together. I thought I could be patient with him until I discovered he had never stopped lying to me. I decided that peace alone was better. Took a long time for me to figure out what to do with all the love I had for him. Story 61. His parents divorced because his father was unfaithful, and their family fell into chaos. His father became addicted to hard drugs, while his mother lived in various men's trailers. Unfortunately, he also went down a bad path, so I decided to end the relationship. Story 62. I left my previous relationship because I didn't want to commit and was drawn to someone new. I ended that relationship the same day I asked the new person out. I still haven't processed my feelings 5 years later. We weren't perfect, but it was the happiest relationship I have experienced, and we likely would be happily married now, living a comfortable life together. Instead, I am alone working on myself. Hopefully, if I am fortunate enough to find myself in that position again, I will understand the importance of putting in the effort. Story 63. I was 45 and she was 21. We were both 19, attending two different colleges in two different towns. The timing wasn't right. Story 64. I couldn't handle the long distance. We were both young and looking at a minimum of 10 years before we could be together. He was living on the other side of the world. He was everything I dreamed of, but the timing wasn't right. Story 65. His friend approached me one day with my now ex-boyfriend's phone and showed me the hundreds of lolicon hentai on his phone. Story 66. He became complacent, making spending time with me feel like a chore. Communication on the topic led to circular discussions with no change. I was damaging myself by fighting for our relationship. Story 67. I spent 5 years together on and off. The instability should have always been a signal that something so tumultuous would not work out. He had mental health and addiction issues, which I always tried to help him through. Disrespect and a lack of regard for my feelings were the last straw. It is truly sad. In the end, you need to find your self-respect and walk away when you are not being appreciated. Story 68. We were together for 6 years. We were both college students when we met, working our way through college by taking jobs in nightclubs. After graduating, I kept my nightclub job, moving up to decent-paying corporate positions at a large nightclub corporation in Las Vegas, while she became a registered nurse. I had an apartment, but we pretty much lived together at her place, and I contributed towards bills and other expenses. Her parents were visiting, and I had never met them. She said, "They wouldn't approve because you work at a club, so just stay at your place." I don't harbor any animosity towards her, but I felt so awful that I left. Story 69. He got drunk and tried to assault me. We were engaged, but I said no. He didn't take it well and attempted to force it. I fought back and returned the ring. Story 70. We were not technically in a relationship, but something close to it. However, we had to part ways because he cheated on me. Story 71. He lost his ambition, and I couldn't give it to him. He eventually just stopped everything. He stopped working, playing guitar, and going to therapy. He became depressed. I tried for over a year to support him as best I could, to motivate him and help him. I paid his share of the rent, planned our dates he didn't want to attend, bought our food, and cleaned the apartment. Eventually, I could no longer carry him as a burden. I was working, going to school, managing our home, and caring for our pets. I couldn't be his caregiver. I felt depleted and empty. It was the hardest decision I ever had to make. I miss him, and I miss the potential he had. I miss who he was when we met. Story 72. She went to graduate school several states away, and I started experiencing anxiety and failing out of my undergraduate program that I still hadn't finished. I loved her so much, and I was incredibly weak and unstable. Long distance was something I couldn't endure at all. She was incredible, beautiful, and very intelligent. Probably better than me, anyway. I think she was able to meet her husband. Life is not often a dream-come-true love story for most people, unfortunately. I tried my best. I was lucky to have known such incredible love with such a wonderful person. That love was what I had dreamed of my entire life. I was blessed to know it and to survive the aftermath of losing it as well. I learned a lot about long suffering and faith, one of the best and most meaningful experiences of my life. Story 73. I am still upset about a girl I dated in college, and I am now 56 years old. I still don't know why she ended our relationship, as she never told me. I suspect it might have been another guy. Frustrates me. I have followed her online for years, but she rarely posts. I would love to contact her, but I believe she would perceive me as a creep. Story 74. I'm a nice guy. My crime? I was too nice. She basically ran me off and I didn't look back. Surprise, ladies. Not all men cheat on you or hurt you for burning the meatloaf. Some of us are actually in love with you, not your best friend. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.